Thank you so much, Julie. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to gather with you. It's such an interesting experience to be a teacher who is teaching in a public forum like this, where you really don't know who your students are. But, all week as I'm imagining being with all of you and looking at the Parsha, it's almost like I've never had this experience, but imagining meeting your child before your child is born, what are they going to be like? What's our life going to be like? It's like a very prophetic experience. And that's what I think of all of you. So basically all of you are my children. And now we're going to study the Parsha together. And I've been dreaming of you all week. And I'm just really grateful to, to be with all of you today. We're going to be talking about imagination and about our senses. And so I know some of you have already peeked at the source sheet. So if you have, maybe don't answer this question, but I want to ask folks to type in the chat. If we think of our five senses, if you had a sixth sense, what would it be? What's our sixth sense? No wrong answer, just what would it be? Or if someone had a sixth sense, what would it be? Truth, imagination. Yeah, keep them coming. Emotion, healing, intuition, empathy, creativity. Another one for intuition. I had an intuition you would all like this question. Patterns, charisma, beautiful, compassion, tribe, community, another empathy, feeling the pain of others, beautiful. Same sense, same connection as empathy. Yeah, it seems to me that the idea that we only have five senses and all of these other things are so abstract that it could be very limiting, especially when we're talking about fantastical events and also peak experiences. So this week's Parsha, we're fully in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, and here we are, and all of Deuteronomy is actually just Moses's retelling of the rest of the Torah. In theory, nothing new happens in Deuteronomy, though of course there are some pieces that are different than the way he told them. And we've all had this experience, there's the experience you had, then there's the way you tell it, then there's the way you tell it after that, and then later on there's the way you tell it again and again and again. The story always evolves and changes. Some of us might have a moment in our lives that we have a memory of, but really it's the memory of the story of someone telling us the thing that happened. And some scholars would even say that the book of Deuteronomy was written significantly later than the rest of the Torah, and is not, those who look at the Torah as a historical document, was not Moses's summary of the Torah, but it was later scholars or later groups of people's preferable way of retelling the other parts of the Torah. And so some of it is written differently just because it's Moses talking, and it's more in a kind of, here's my speech, I'm going to tell you the summary of everything you need. But then there's also some fun little components that are different in various ways. I want us to actually open with this beautiful passage by the contemporary author Jonathan Safran Foer about memory. And he defines memory as the sixth sense. Jews have six senses: touch, taste, sight, smell, hearing, memory. When Gentiles experience and process the world through the traditional senses and use memory only as a second-order means of interpreting events, for Jews, memory is no less primary than the prick of a pin, or its silver glimmer, or the taste of blood it pulls from the finger. The Jew is pricked by a pin and remembers other pins. It is only by tracing the pinprick back to other pinpricks, when his mother tried to fix his sleeve while his arm was still in it, when his grandfather's fingers fell asleep from stroking his great-grandfather's damp forehead, when Abraham tested the knife point to be sure Isaac would feel no pain, that the Jew is able to know why it hurts. When a Jew encounters a pin, he asks, what does it remember like? We'll take a moment just for this concept to land. So entering the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to look at this idea of memory as a sixth sense, and how it would be very easy to say, well, you know what would be better if my memory was perfect, right? If every time I remembered something, I remembered it exactly as it happened, and I didn't leave out any details, and I just could have had this, not just photographic memory, but videographic memory. Like, wouldn't that be great? So I'm curious, just kind of like with a show of hands, I know not everyone has their video on, like how many people have had moments where they're like, you know what would be great? Videographic memory, remembering every detail. Yeah? We've had moments like that. But then, of course, there's the opposite. There's other layers to that. Actually, like, not remembering every detail is probably really healthy for us sometimes. And we're actually really glad that we don't remember every detail. And instead of remembering in a videographic way, we can remember through other concepts and other senses. So as we get closer to looking at some passages from our Parsha, I'm going to, I want to bring us into this line from Legato D. So I'm going to sing this tonight. I hope some of you will get to sing it tonight or listen to someone singing it on Zoom. This is a poem which is, only a few hundred years old, that is now very common in most synagogues. Legato D. This is the second line of Legato D. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad hishmianu el hamiyuchad Adonai echad u'shmo echad l'shem u'tiferet v'lit hila. Keep and remember in one saying. We are caused to listen by the unified God. Adonai is one, his name is one, to his name and to glory and to praise. The reason why I'm bringing us this line is because of this very first line, Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad. Keep and remember in one saying. And this is a very interesting and specific way of interpreting something that is in our Parsha and connecting it to the second telling of a previous Parsha. What do I mean by that? What we're going to read in a couple of minutes is that the telling of the receiving of the 10 commandments, or the 10 utterances, in this week's Parsha has the word shamor, to keep, and the version of the 10 commandments that was in the book of Exodus has the word zachor, remember. And so this is in some ways like a meta concept here, because what I want us to take from this is that this week's Parsha has the word shamor. And again, when it's talking about Shabbat, when the Parsha is, when the Torah is talking about Shabbat, we'll look at it in just 1 second. In the Exodus version of the 10 Commandments, like the original version, the verse that the Torah tells us is keep Shabbat, shamor Shabbat. And in the Deuteronomy version, that is this week's Parsha, is Zachor, remember Shabbat. And The rest of it is very, very similar. Again, we'll look at it in just a moment. And I find it very interesting, slightly hilarious. If I was a stand-up comedian, I would have a whole bit about like, Moses, you're supposed to be retelling the story and you didn't remember the word remember. Why did it change? What's the deal with that, right? That would be my stand-up comedian routine. And for this week, I want us to look a little bit closer of the balance of these two words. And I want us to think about memory, not just as, something that we're hoping to have, like I was saying, like a videographic, perfect memory, but memory is something that evolves in a way that can serve us. The other thing about what I was mentioning before is thinking about the role of memory in a fantastical moment, in a perhaps supernatural event. And, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Sinai and what happened at Sinai. So even before we read this week's Parsha, which is Moses's supposedly retelling of the book of Exodus, I want us to also take a step back and look at this 19th century memory of this concept. The silent Aleph. Folks can see my shared screen, yeah? Great. Is it possible that at Sinai we heard nothing from the mouth of God other than the letter Aleph of the first utterance? Anochi Adonai Elohechem. I am Hashem your God. As we read in Exodus 20:15, all of the people saw the thunder. In other words, they saw what they normally heard. At Sinai, we saw the letter Aleph evoking the name and presence of God. And there's this idea that the senses almost got mixed up in each other, right? We saw the thunder. How could that be? Where I live in New York City, there's been so much thunder recently, and it's been so loud. It's maybe the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life. And it's so loud that it's more than a sound, because I can feel it in my body, like I can feel the sensation. It evokes memory. It reminds me of other sounds. And I love this depiction of what the receiving actually was. It wasn't actually even a sound. Somehow they saw the letter Aleph, and again, they don't mean literally here, and that presence of God was so strong that these teachings came through. So in a moment, we're going to peek at the Exodus passage that includes the Ten Commandments, and then we'll move to this week's Parsha. And everyone had such great ideas before, but I just want to pause and see if anyone wants to make a comment either in the chat or to unmute on this concept of the senses getting mixed together, or of evolving memory, because we're going to go pretty specific into the chat. You can use the raise hand function. We're going to go pretty specific into the text. So anyone want to make a comment or ask a question related to the senses getting mixed up, or the balance between evolving memory and specific memory? Is that a hand? Yes.
Whose hand?
Nels, N-E-L-S. You can unmute now, yeah.
Yes, okay. Well, just the idea that each has different perceptions. You can look at something and it's not the same for everyone. Everyone has a history, everyone has a a perception. So you can see things and differently. The same thing means different things to different people.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so we all stood at Sinai, but we all had a different experience. So this person, their primary experience was seeing something. This person was hearing something. This person was experiencing the Aleph. And then it was someone's job to somehow capture that and write it down. And that's now called the Torah. And then the question is, how do you write down a collective experience of hundreds of people? And then when you read it, it actually kind of looks confusing because you're like, how could all of these things have happened at the same time? That's why I love this phrase, Shamor b'zachor b'dibor echad. There were two words that were said at the same time. How is that possible? There's been some nice comments in the chat. I know someone with perfect pitch who sees colors instead of hearing the notes. Amazing. In our Chinese garden, there's a phrase above the walkway that says, listen to the fragrance. Accident witnesses often forget or have different memories later at a trial. That's why depositions are taken so that the memory is captured. Synthesia, yeah. We have another comment. If someone converts to Judaism, do they acquire the sixth sense immediately, or is it experiential that we aren't born with it but become attuned to it? I love that question. I would love to ask people I know who converted to Judaism if they have that experience. I know in the case of my father who converted to Judaism when he was in his early 20s, when he met my mother, it wasn't like some people say, you know, oh, I grew up with no religion and then I fell in love with this person and got excited about, you know, their lifestyle and took on their religion. When my dad met my mother, he really felt like he was born with a Jewish soul and that he was really born Jewish. He just happened to be born into a family that wasn't Jewish. And he would actually describe, if he were asked that question, that meeting her and getting to know her and having that life of Judaism that was like a memory, that coming into Judaism was like a memory that he couldn't quite place. I wonder if Garden Eden in every sense was at its maximum, like the colors were brighter, the birds were louder, or the smells were fragrant. I love that. If the senses were heightened. I know that there's a lot of really beautiful midrashim about smell, and that the Garden of Eden, that the smell was very, very strong. Someone named Sion wrote a memory. Wow. If you can elaborate on that, or if you want to unmute, I'm curious what you mean by that, or if it was just a response to what I just said. Heightened senses, like being in love, right? It's like all your senses at once, and like you can't even name one of them. Again, that's why I just keep coming back to this beautiful line from the Legato D poem, Shamor b'zachor b'dibor echad. Like the fact that you could hear two words in b'dibor echad at the same time sounds like fantastical or magical, and yet that's what it's trying to describe. That's what the poem is trying to describe. Okay, beautiful. All right, thanks everyone for your wonderful comments. Feel free to keep typing in the chat if you have other comments, and I'll also pause with a specific question in a couple of minutes. All right, yeah, like when Adam saw Eve for the first time, right? To describe it in one word or in one sense, that would be very limiting. All right. Going back to screen share. Here we go. All right. So Exodus 20 is the first place where we have the 10 Commandments written. A lot of people are surprised that when you look at, oops, 1 second. I did something weird with my screen. Hold on. Oh, there we go. A lot of people are surprised that when they look at the 10 Commandments in the Torah portion, that it's not like, for example, 10 verses, like verse 1, Commandment 1, verse 2, Commandment 2. This starts on Exodus 2 and goes through 17. And it's actually kind of like, well, why is it 10? What are the 10? Where does it start? Where does it end? most people, when they think of the Ten Commandments, they like think of maybe something like this. This is the Hebrew photograph I got from mydewishlearning.com. Or maybe they've seen them written out, in single sentences. But in the Torah portion, there's some commandments that, have some commentary. So we'll look briefly at Exodus and then we'll go to our Deuteronomy. So the Ten Commandments, this section opens with this word Anochi, Anochi Hashem Elohecha. And this is what the Midrash about the silent Aleph was talking about. There's actually a beautiful, I didn't put it in here, but there's a beautiful Midrash that's modern Midrash that's based on a series of other Midrashim from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner about, well, again, what actually happened? Did God speak? Did they hear God's voice? Did Moses just kind of, transmit it? Did Moses hear it maybe silently in his head and then tell everyone? And there's this idea that, the whole Torah maybe was given at Sinai, maybe just the Ten Commandments, maybe just the first commandment, maybe just the word Anochi. Like maybe it was enough to just hear the word Anochi and then everyone was like, I got it. That was loud enough. That was intense enough. Even just being like, I heard God's voice. I'm like, whoa, I'm done. And then there's this idea that it was just the Aleph. And that's why you often see in this Hebrew depiction, this word Anochi Hashem is like the summary of the first commandment. I am the eternal. So we're not going to read through these one by one. We're going to look at the summary of them in just a minute. But I just wanted to point out, I just think it's very interesting that it's like this many verses to get through all of them. I included this passage that I referenced earlier. They witnessed the thunder and lightning and the smoke, and they fell back into the distance. It's a very embodied experience. To say that what they got was, they received words, really doesn't cover the supernatural, I think is a good word, description of what happened. And the fact that Moses says, don't be afraid, gives me a sense that I think they were afraid. I think it was very intense. All right, so let's peek at Deuteronomy 5. We're not going to go too deep line by line, but I'm just highlighting here this concept of Zachor, which is we had in the Exodus, remember, and then pretty much the commandments are similar until we get to this word Shamor. So the difference between remember, which is what it says in Exodus, and Shamor, which says in Deuteronomy. One thing that's interesting to me about this is that when we talk about what is our relationship to Shabbat, especially in modern times, which is mostly not actually influenced directly from reading the Torah, but influenced by rabbinic writings, by Talmudic writings, is that actually Shamor, the guarding or keeping of Shabbat, is a much more commonly used concept. What is my relationship to Shabbat? I either am or am not shomer or shomeret Shabbat. And that word shomer, to keep or guard, is a word that is used very commonly in contemporary Jewish life to refer to someone who keeps a certain set of laws of Shabbat. And often if someone says, I'm an observant Jew or I'm a religious Jew, what they mean is, I am shomer Shabbat. And they when they say I'm shomer Shabbat, they mean that I'm an observant Jew and vice versa. That's the word that people use. And that is, very commonly accepted. We don't as often hear the phrase Zachor as a concept for people's relationship to Shabbat, even though I might argue that's the original relationship to Shabbat. If you look at Exodus, Deuteronomy is just like the memory of it, and the second telling and the reformatting of the original. Actually, the original is Zachor. And it's this concept, Zachor, to remember the Sabbath. This is the same word that we use when we say Zichronam Livracha, may that person be a blessing. And or Zecher Tzadich Livracha, may that person's memory be a blessing. Or if you like Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day. So Zachor at Yom HaShabbat is actually the original commandment, remember the Sabbath. And then only in Deuteronomy times do we get this Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. So I'm going to pause just for a moment because I want us to pause a screen share just for a moment. And some folks here, this might be very new looking at these two, and some of you, this might be a common concept. And I want to look at a few of these comments, and I want to hear from folks. You can type in the chat or raise your hand. How does this land for you, this idea that actually Zachor Shabbat is what was in Exodus, and Shamor Shabbat is the memory or the retelling of the original, because there's not really that many other things that are different between the two. So someone said words fail to describe one's relationship with God. It's experiential. I like to relate Anochi to Moses' experience of the budding bush. Yeah, great. So that presence there. There are many people who are Shomer Shabbat and observant of Shabbat, but not Orthodox. Absolutely. That's why I try to use the word observant or religious or Shomer Shabbat. Someone can be Shomer Shabbat and not be Orthodox. In Israel, actually, there's this very wordy phrase, dati shivyoni, which literally means religious egalitarian. So the synagogue I really like to go to in Jerusalem is called Sod Siach, and it's a halachic egalitarian synagogue. People there are Shomer Shabbat. They don't use microphones. They don't use instruments. They do a full prayers, but it's all genders are counted together, and it's a really special place. Someone said a conversion to Judaism could be an intense experience in and of itself. Absolutely. While in Israel and in slavery, they could only remember Shabbat but not observe it. When they began to settle in the land, they'll be able to keep the Shabbat. That's so interesting. The reason why I like that is because it kind of points to this idea of remembering forwards and backwards. So usually when we say the word remember, I think what we really think we're talking about is I'm remembering. I'm if you think of members, so like little pieces, remembering, putting them together, reconstructing them. Sometimes you have a dream and you just like basically relive part of your day. To me, that's what I'm thinking about remember. But something about this comment from Carrie is about remembering Shabbat. It's almost like they're remembering a future Shabbat, and then only later are they observing it. Someone said, spell the name of the synagogue. Sod Siach, S-O-D-S-I-A-C-H. Sod Siach in Jerusalem. It's more of like an independent minyan. It's a special place in Jerusalem. And by the way, if folks want to unmute and speak, you can raise your hand and Julie will call on you. And the word guarding suggests a higher level of responsibility and awareness than just remembering. Asking someone to remember suggests that they have not cultivated it as a habit yet. Cool. So Siach, thanks for typing that in. All right. Was there another comment or question anyone want to unmute? Sometimes we can be shy to unmute when we're in such a big group. Oh, there we go. We have one right there.
Sorry, I can't actually see all the hands.
Okay.
So if you know where the virtual hand button is, or Sarah, if you could tell me.
Yvonne with an I. Actually, I can just click the ask to unmute, I think, because I'm a co-host.
I found it. Thanks.
Go ahead, Yvonne with an I. There you go.
Oh, okay. Hi, Yvonne from Miami. I find it extremely interesting that you went into these two Hebrew words. And when you were talking about it, I didn't understand what the big deal was, because one is an action and the other one is more like a feeling. I would say that, basing it in my rational way of thinking, in Exodus, it should have been shmor, the actual what you need to do, the clear commandment. You need to keep the Shabbat. And then later, okay, remember what I told you to keep the Shabbat, because in order to remember something, you have to have a previous experience. That's what I was thinking about the Hebrew, the sahor, liskor, you can only liskor something, remember something of something that happened, not something that, then you mentioned the future. So it's very confusing, but it's very interesting that he puts first the remember and then the commandment of what to do, because they didn't have a Shabbat before, I think. So, okay, keep it, and then later, remember to keep it. So I thought that was extremely interesting to point out.
Thank you. As someone who is a dream worker and who studies dreams and studies dreams as Torah, the idea that you can remember something that actually never happened to you, like from a previous generation or from maybe your soul, and you can also remember or really like kind of have a vision of something in the future that hasn't happened yet, that resonates with me very, very much. I think it's very funny anytime in the Torah we're like first, second, before, after. Rashi, the French commentator, says there is no before and after in the Torah. It's just all one Torah. There's no such thing as linear time. And that's like a modern concept that we're trying to put on it. Judaism, we talk about having either spiral time, or some say spiral linear time, which is that it's spiraling over itself and then just going up a little bit, a millimeter over and over again. But the trying to put a linear concept on the Torah actually won't work. And, there's something about what is a story and what is a book, that and what is a speech. This is Deuteronomy is Moses's speech. Someone wrote down Exodus, and then this is how Moses remembered it. Maybe Deuteronomy is, a better memory of what actually happened and not necessarily what came second. I'll read this comment, and if someone wants to speak, you can raise your hand, but you can also just even type in the chat, I have a comment, and we'll also call on you. Kayla wrote, remember versus keep is an interesting distinction. In Deuteronomy, Moses is speaking to the generation that came out of the wilderness, the generation that did not physically stand at Sinai. Beautiful. So part of his retelling is not just, hey, remember this? It's actually an evolution of the people so that they need to hear it. And still, we have it written down and it's in the Torah. This is not a commentary on the Torah. This is within the 5 books of the Torah is the retelling. So to me, there's also a concept here, which I feel like is very Jewish, which is that like part of the Torah is the retelling of the Torah. And having it once, isn't quite enough. I have one more piece to share. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, I will. Yes, you can unmute. I see your hand. Wait, there we go.
It seems to me that the Torah is reciprocal to actions. So that in learning and studying about the Torah, it produces actions, which in turn further strengthens the desire to learn about the Torah. So there's no separation. It is that cyclical description that you offered.
Thank you. I love that. The cyclical description of reading the Torah over and over again, the Torah itself, the way that the scrolls is, on top of each other. I sometimes like to think of the words, like when you roll up the Torah, like if you were to put a pin through the Torah, like what sentence could you write of like this word is on top of this word is on top of this word? The way that we, when we turn the Torah, it's like a spirally shape. And it's like the Torah, what I like to think of is, what message is the Torah giving us that is still relevant today? There's plenty of messages in the Torah that are misogynist, that are racist, that are violent, that I want to hear, but also figure out, how I'm going to relate to them. And there are plenty of messages in the Torah that are ethical and that are beautiful and that are spiritually inspiring. And I want to draw closer to those. But whatever the message that the Torah has for me, I want to look closer at it and see how it might apply to my life, which is what we're going to do with our next reading. Are you ready? Okay. So, we're not going to go too deep in this, but if folks are looking for some more independent study after this, there's a fun activity you can do, which is this layout of the 10 Commandments, 5 on one side, 5 on the other side. There's some interesting parallels between whichever one is across from whichever one. So the parallel between 1 and 6, 2 and 7. We're going to skip that piece today, but Julie, maybe you'll bring me back in Exodus when we get to the Parsha next time, and we can do that a little bit more deeply. That would be fun. All right. So a friend of mine sent me this, my friend Josh posted this photo on Facebook. It was actually last year. And he commented, so this guy drives on Shabbat. This is in Philadelphia. And the reason why he said that is that there is possibly new, I found some evidence of it around 2013. It might be a little bit older than that. There's a new trend in contemporary Judaism of people identifying as Zachor Shabbat. What could that be? Zachor Shabbat. That is, so we're coming back to our concept, to Zachor, to remember Shabbat, but maybe we're not Shomer Shabbat in a legal halachic way, but they're Zocher Shabbat. So I drive to synagogue, and that's within my Shabbat observance, is to go to synagogue, but I'm going to drive there. And this is potentially, I don't know the original source, but a source that I really resonated with is this essay from 2013 from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, who is a Reform rabbi. Here's what he writes. We need a way to describe liberal Jews who are serious about Shabbat. Shomer Shabbat, keeper of Shabbat, based as it is on the language of the actual commandment in Deuteronomy, could be ideal. Unfortunately, it's been appropriated and defined meticulously and oppressively by someone else. So again, he's talking from his perspective as a Reform rabbi. So we return to the text of the 4th commandment and realize that it's said twice, once in Deuteronomy and again in Exodus. In Deuteronomy, we are told Shamor, keep the Sabbath, but in Exodus, the verb is different. We are told Zachor, remember the Sabbath. Perhaps it is for us, 21st century modern Jews who are interested in staying connected to Jewish practice, but maybe not the specifics of Jewish law. Perhaps it is for us to create a new standard of Shabbat behavior called Zachor Shabbat. One who is Zachor Shabbat would remember throughout the day's duration that it was Shabbat. Not so easy as it at first sounds. We say to each other, do anything you want, drive, spend money, use electricity. I personally use Zoom on Shabbat. It's a really great way to access a lot of really lovely content and learning. Do anything you want, as long as you will remember that it is Shabbat, and will ensure that whatever you do will be lichvod HaShabbat, for the honor of Shabbat. And then I also included another article about this concept from a British writer. And we're going to wrap up on this idea. And I'm curious to hear, folks, what you think about this idea of, we started with this idea of Jewish memory and the strength of memory. I know a lot of people who maybe, if they kept Shabbat at one point in their life in a strictly religious Jewish law halachic way, and now they don't keep it in that level. Their idea of Zocher Shabbat is actually feeling really guilty that they're not keeping Shabbat, which is not what I'm implying or encouraging people to do. And especially for folks here who are Jewish and who are connected to Jewish practice, but maybe aren't Orthodox or not Shomer Shabbat or not halachically inclined. How does this land for you, this idea that you could actually self-define, just like someone says, I am Shomer Shabbat, you could self-define as I am Zocher Shabbat. Yes, Carrie, I see your hand.
Yeah, hi. This actually reminds me that in parallel, many of us are keep kosher style, but not kosher in the strict meaning of the word. Even Reform synagogues in this area, if you go, they'll be kosher style in the sense that they won't mix milk with the meat. They won't have shellfish or pork, but other than that, they're not really kosher. I think that this idea is basically the same.
Beautiful. So it's the idea that we're keeping the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And so we're using the Torah language to hold it up as authentic modern Jews.
Right. As a matter of fact, I go a little further. For example, on Passover, I noticed in the synagogue, in the kosher section, they have now, you can make, they have bagels made out of potato flour and things like that. You get the pizza kosher for Passover and whatnot. Now, when I look at that, I think that might be observing the literal, the letter of the law. In other words, that might be Shemor Pesach, but it's not observing the spirit of the law. In other words, it wouldn't be a Zechor Pesach.
Right. Thank you. That's interesting. That's interesting idea. You can go the other way. So we have a question in the chat, which folks can respond to, but we probably will not resolve in the next 3 minutes. Is it possible to remember and honor Shabbat without ritual? Can you just say, it's Shabbat, I'm going to go out for pizza with my friends because that feels like the spirit of Shabbat. I'm going to think about Shabbat. I'm going to say the word Shabbat. Maybe I'll even say hamotzi at the restaurant over my pizza. And if I get a glass of wine after the pizza, maybe I'll say Kiddush a couple hours later. I'm remembering Shabbat, but maybe I'll do a couple of rituals. Am I really remembering Shabbat? I love that question. I think it's really different for everyone. I'd be curious, if we were to go meet Abraham or Moses, did they make Kiddush and Motzi? Did they, go hear the public Torah reading? Did they, what did their Shabbat look like? Even just the words of Kiddush we say is, a rabbinic invention. And we have any step of connecting us to Torah and cultivating curiosity of Torah is good, Tov. Right? I love that. Maybe you have to work Friday night. Maybe you have to work most of the day Saturday, but you on your car, on your drive to your job, you listen to a Shabbat services on Zoom on your phone. To me, that is a beautiful way of connecting to Shabbat and the idea that you would be Zocher Shabbat. And then this is our last comment, and we're gonna wrap up. We need to define, remember, what does that even mean? So that brings us back to, our first concept is, what is memory? Is it the past? Is it photographic or videographic? Is it the future? Thanks everyone. Shabbat Shalom.